why do we choose to do this course rather than traditional publishing? Well, for me, I'll start this one and answer and go back the other way. For me, I started with looking at traditional publishing and did all the usual editing, submitted to agents, submitted to publishers. I was published by 2 different publishers. One accepted Ancient Blood and then promptly folded before it could be published. So then I turned around, got picked up by another publisher who turned out to be a con artist. Basically scammed me out of some money for publishing, and then disappeared, folded up and disappeared. And then a third that was just a well-intentioned author and her daughter who thought they could be a publishing house, and that eventually just fell apart through mismanagement. So I pretty much got to the point of saying, all right, I've had enough of this. If I can't get published by like a major name, then I'm just gonna go independent, because throughout the course of all that, I made enough contacts and I learned enough to be able to publish the books myself, and I'm much happier with the way they came out in that respect. So that's my answer to that.
Okay. When I was growing up in college, I was always submitting stories to literary magazines and always getting very polite letters back saying, you know, your work is good, you know, you need to work a little bit more on it, you know, and keep submitting. So when I actually saw the opportunity for a friend, Marie Gilbert, who is the writer of a Blue Oasis series that she had started like doing self-publishing, a light bulb went off in my head and saying, oh, well, that's something I could do. You know, I've always wanted to publish a book, you know, and I can have like artistic control, you know, which is something that I would love to do, you know, because it's something reserved for like Spielberg's and Lucas's, you know. So I tried it, and the result was The Eye Hermes, you know, a book I'm very proud of.
Well, I also tried to publish through traditional routes. I started with the biggest and best of the publishing houses and all their little tributaries, because there are a great many that are connected to each other and we don't even know it. And I had no luck there, and I also submitted to probably enough agents to fill Yankee Stadium. And then I went down to the medium-sized publishers who didn't as often require agents and had no luck there. Then I was at a conference last year in Philly. It's a wonderful thing to do, go to as many conferences as you can, because the people you get to meet, you just never know. I took her, the publisher of a small house, I took her workshop on pitching and crafted my pitch and listened to everything she said about submitting to the small houses. And she fell in love with my pitch and said, in 20 years I've never heard a better one. Send me your manuscript as soon as you polish it up. And I did, and I was really jazzed about it. And then she said, thanks, but no thanks. But, yeah. But I figured as long as it was in good shape, I would go for a last round of smaller publishers with my updated, because the manuscript was years old at this point. So one of those publishers bit, and it is an unusual situation because it is an e-publisher strictly. So it's a wonderful thing, because if you're accepted by a publisher of any size, you don't pay to have the art and the illustration and submit to reviewers and all that good stuff. You do forfeit some control, but you don't pay for any of those things. But you also, if it's an ebook, you're selling an abstract. You know, it's like selling land in the Bermuda Triangle. People can't see it. So you're selling the idea of somebody falling in love with your book. So I'm not sorry I did it, and I may combine that with self-publishing. I'm thinking very seriously of doing a print-on-demand run. So I may wind up with the best of 2 worlds.
Unlike I'm a delicate flower and I don't handle rejection. I know I don't look like that on the outside, but inside I'm a 5-year-old. So for me, it really came down to timelines, control, and not to compare myself to Mozart, but like I wanted as many notes or words in there as I wanted. And when I write something, whether I'm writing, a letter to a client or, my memoirs or whatever, I choose my words carefully and I want them in the order I have them in, and that's the way I want it. And since I'm not Stephen King or whomever, and even those guys have editors, I didn't want to hand my work off to somebody else who was not me. Very egocentric, but that's kind of this was my book, and so my world revolved around that for the time I was writing it. So self-publishing really became, and thank goodness, we're in the time where you can do these things, because I remember when I was in college, it was, you want to get a book published, you go up to the door, you throw the manuscript over the wall, you hope to hear something, and they go, no, we don't want you, and they close the door in the face. Which I still to this day have some friends that are going that route, and they're a little frustrated, so I'm trying to guide them into self-publishing. I wrote it because it was a thing I had to do, and I was challenged by a friend to do it, and it became this own creature, and then I had to give the creature a cover, and then I had to figure some artwork to go around the creature. And the best way to do that was with print on demand. So I wound up doing a Kickstarter because, what is it in the, you never use your own money? Isn't that a rule? Is that from the,
and you get your gun.
Exactly, don't ever use your own money. Or that might have been another movie. But I didn't have that kind of cash to spare. I was running a business and my cash was kind of tight. So I got some feedback and they said, you know what, if you print that, I'll read it. And I'm like, okay, well now I gotta get it printed. So how about we do a Kickstarter, you pledge X amount of bucks, you get a book, covers the cost of the printing, everybody's happy, and it worked out well. So I did this initially through Digipod, and then I moved it to CreateSpace, and then I moved the print book to Ingram, with the hopes of maybe getting into a library at some point. So self-publishing has been the way to go. Now that's not to say that Penguin comes banging on my door.
Yeah, right.
I may not say no, but I also don't want to have to deal with editing. Just like you said, with these are your emotions, your feelings. This is not my personal story, but these are emotions that are very close to me, either my clients or people I know, or it's kind of an experience that I think would apply to everybody, and so I wanted to make sure that nobody fooled around with that except me. So all the glory or all the failure, it's online.
Yeah.
With self-publishing.
That's it.
That's funny. I feel like the old-fashioned fuddy-duddy here now. I started out younger with magazines and short stories and things like that, which it's amazing how much the medium has changed, just in the last few decades, where a lot of that market doesn't exist, but then new markets opened up. And with the vampire series, in the 90s and the early aughts, vampires were not a popular thing. And then when Twilight came around, it made it worse. Nobody wanted to publish vampires. And I would describe myself as mid-press or small press, traditionally published. I enjoy working with the in-between kind of, you get a little bit of an intimacy and you have an editor and they do a lot of covers and marketing, but it's not so huge in a big publishing house where you get completely lost in the shuffle, where you're completely just cut off if you don't make X amount of copies. And a lot of the e-publishing venues and the print-on-demand kind of options had, I guess for maybe the last 10 years, e-publishing had a little bit of a nice boom, and now that seems to be folding and changing around into something else again. And so I've gone through phases where I've done a lot of fiction at one time, I've done series in a row, and I've gone through phases where I've done a lot of more nonfiction material. And HorrorAddicts.net initially started as a podcaster, and they've expanded into publishing. They were holding a lot of contests, the Wicked Women Writers, and things like that, where a lot of fiction and anthologies again. and they decided to become their own independent publisher, like you say, to have every kind of control and to be able to have everything designed in-house, which when you're a nice business marketer kind of person, you can do that. I have, you know, I don't have the business and the technological head. I'm the writer, so I don't think I could self-publish. So I still am into, you know, whatever the traditional venues are. The trouble with that is, you know, the next fiction book I'm working on, you know, Laura's Cave is gone, Sam Hain Publishing is gone. A lot of times by the time you finish a book, you're constantly doing your research of, you know, what options are there, because like Brian says, there's so many things that, you know, people think they can publish for everybody, they fold, they change over, people are scams. So it's like, where do you go next when you're publishing?
And with me, I think I mentioned it before, as part of a series of workshops, the facilitator was self-published, and I thought, well, that might be an option for me, considering back when I wrote the science fiction series and started sending them out to publishers looking for agents or whatever, that I just kept smashing into walls and, oh, thank you for your submission, blah, 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 so the form letters. So I thought, well, maybe I should investigate this new format of publishing. And so the facilitator says, well, you've got books, right? I says, no, but they're my babies. I want to traditionally publish those. I'm going to hold off on those, but I'll write something. And in 8 months, boom, there was Earthchild, based on multiple journal entries of dreams that I had when I was becoming different animals in the dreams. Brushed them up, had to make them more story than dream, obviously, and put them together in journal entries with this central character. And it sold pretty well when it first came out. I mean, 5 book sales in one day was like, yes, I'm successful! You know, when you've never seen or held a book with your name on the front, you know, and the idea that you had some hand in the designing of the cover and everything from beginning to end to the word choice. My idea is that we are artists, and you're not going to ask Picasso to say, oh no, we don't like that blue in that corner, you have to change that to black. And the eye's a little off center. Well, it's Picasso. So, you know, these are our word children, or in the sake of my science fiction, my world children. So we're pretty close to our art, and to hand them over to somebody who's going to say, yeah, we like this, but that's got to go, and that's got to go, and this isn't working for us, so you have to change. It's my story! And you're telling me I have to change it? Well, now it's not my story anymore. And they're saying, yeah, and that's why you get the royalties and we get the rest. So there was some part of that hypocrisy or hierarchy that kind of turned me away, and self-publishing was, like you said, you either fail or you succeed, but at least you can say I did it. Do the Frank Sinatra line, okay? So being that writing is an art and we are artists, sometimes we do have to stick to our guns and say, I'm going to do it, whether it's successful, whether I get on any list or whatever, but what is the purpose of the writing, and is it a matter of sharing it and having the possibility of sharing it, or waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and I'm already have a vintage that I might not be alive to see the rest of my books even proposed to an editor or agent, much less printed up and on a shelf somewhere. So for me, self-publishing was an option that worked.
Okay. So what